how about learning a little bit about your Oklahoma history? John JDwyer is a longtime adjunct professor of history and ethics at Southern Nazarene University and a former history chair at a classical college preparatory school, newspaper publisher, radio host, award-winning author, and many times, it seems like about this time of year, John, I like to talk to him about Oklahoma history because he is such an expert. His books have won many awards, some fiction, some non-fiction, and we could make up Oklahoma stories, but why not go with the real ones? Welcome to 1000.
Great to be back on with the Queen of Oklahoma Radio.
Oh, the Queen!
I love saying that.
I love hearing it. Yes, but when you think of, well, first of all, you're in the second of a multi-series set of books on Oklahoma history. You've written some nonfiction books some fiction books that have won gold medals and things like that. But as you compare fact to fiction, what conclusion do you draw about Oklahomans?
You know, it's a constant revelation to me, Gwyn, because you're right. It's two different types of insanity, writing fiction and nonfiction from a historical standpoint. But it's fun, and since I've really felt a calling for the last many years, probably the last 15 years or so, to just really focus my historical studies, teaching, research, writing on Oklahoma, where I grew up in Duncan, Oklahoma.
I wish everyone could see you, because you're here with your boots and jeans and your cowboy hat.
Well, you know, somebody asked me about this at my previous meeting, and I said, well, you know, when you grow up in Duncan, it's just all around you, and you don't even realize it's not normal for most of the world, you know. But, you know, as far as Oklahoma history learning, I think the thing that has really foremost for me, Gwyn, is the quiet, anonymous courage and perseverance of the people that literally built a barren wilderness into this blessed land that you and I love, for all of its imperfections and zaniness and you know, whatever we want to say. We love this place. We choose to stay here, and we want to raise our kids and grandkids here. So I think that's it. And that's, as you know, a lot of different people. It's the the American pioneers of the late 1800s, early 1900s. It's the natives that came on the Trails of Tears, on the forced reservations. It's the ex-slaves that came out west hoping to find a place, which many of them did, where they could actually own their own land. Even in more recent times, the Vietnamese boat people that have helped build such a great part of this Oklahoma City and other communities. So I think that as I've dug down deep, whether it is Shortgrass, the historical novel, or the Oklahomans series of history books, what comes through to me clearly is the greatest history. Most of it was not really recorded for very many people. It was these anonymous stories of courage where men and women and young people were way out there on a limb. And we talk about that in the Oklahomans, that Oklahoma is the land of the second, third, and sometimes last chance. This is a state full of people that had nowhere else to go, and they drove their stake in the ground here, drew their line in the sand, and said, this is where I'm going to make a destiny for me and my people.
It's so uplifting to talk to you. I mean, it makes us feel really good, and I think probably you wrote this, that our people are as diverse as our terrain, and so it makes us a very rich culture. I know that Shortgrass, which is a work of
Pseudo-fiction,
okay, has won the gold medal.
Yes.
And yet you're doing the series of history books. Where do you go? You talked about these stories that not very many people know about. Where do you go to get your information if it's not out there? And thank you for making it available for us, but where do you go to get your information?
Well, for instance, Shortgrass, it's a historical novel. It's the main couple of characters are fictional, but they're obviously based on real people, and there are a lot of real characters of Oklahoma note in there, Will Rogers and Wiley Post and Waddy Young, the great first OU All-American football player who was a World War II aviation hero. So in researching for the Oklahomans through the 10 years it took us to do Volume 1, and yes, Volume 2 is on the way. I'm working on it every day. As an author, it's encouraging that people are banging your door saying, when's your next book coming? And it is coming. But I'm about halfway through Volume 2 up through the 1970s. But in researching for the Oklahomans series of Oklahoma history books, you go to primary source documents, which is what the people themselves actually said. You go to secondary documents, which are old records, newspaper archives. One of the things, Dr. Bob Blackburn, that I know you know well, this was kind of his brainchild many years ago, back in about 2005. He saw my Civil War book, The War Between the States, America's Uncivil War, and he said, can you do one of these on Oklahoma history? Mm-hmm. That is a book that people actually want to turn the next page, full of stories and color, inspiration, pictures, and so forth. So that began the process, and as I researched, Gwen, for the Oklahoma history books in all these places, that's how you find out who a people really is. It can't be hidden when you go to a certain number of places for a certain period of years. And Shortgrass was really a child of that. As I researched, having grown up in Duncan, I researched a lot of the history in the Southern Great Plains and the Dust Bowl and stuff during the 30s and so forth. Well, this story of Shortgrass just kind of rose up out of the ether for me of, this young cowboy growing up on the Chisholm Trail, not in the 1870s, but in the 1930s. A couple of generations later, as you know, many of us had forefathers that owned their own land. From the land runs, they lost it because there wasn't enough water, there wasn't enough, of anything to make a living. So they went from being landowners to being tenant farmers to being sharecroppers, a lot of them to moving to the city or California or somewhere. So Shortgrass rose up from my study and research of Oklahoma history, and I thought, let's take this beyond where you can go with a history book. Let's take a family and share the composite story, the Oklahoma experience of brave, bold, poor people, which once again we are constantly complaining that we don't have a big enough budget in this state, or we're 46th in that or 48th in that. We need to remember the history of this state is from the beginning we were a tough, poor people. Now, I don't know about you, but I probably reflect my great-grandparents in a lot of ways that maybe the next person doesn't reflect my great-grandparents. We're the children and the grandchildren of tough, gutty, but poor people. And so that's the story with Shortgrass I wanted to convey, was what about these people that are actually out there on the Chisholm Trail a couple of generations past the land runs and all, and then you have, lo and behold, a world war comes on top of a Great Depression and a Dust Bowl. How did Oklahomans respond to that? And that drove me, that became a compulsion for me, Gwen, to not just have a comment or two, but what was it really like back then?
How did Oklahomans respond to World War I?
Well, and of course, World War I's kind of the backstory to Shortgrass, and then it comes into World War II. But one thing that was common in both those wars was they responded slowly. They were reluctant to get involved. They didn't want to, especially World War II, after what had happened in World War I, the people that fought World War I weren't excited for their own sons and daughters to go through what they had. But then once it got started, they united incredibly, and it was a propulsive force. And Oklahomans, as always they do, we won proportionally almost the most medals, every Medal of Honor, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross of any state. When you look at the proportion of population, we have, what I said a minute ago, a brave, gutty bunch of poor people. Now, we've got some people with wealth now, but that's kind of our history. So in Shortgrass, it shows how you have a lot of people that in the 30s were faced with the decision, what do I do if I can't earn a living for my family? Is there another way to find it? Some people moved from the country into the city. Some people took up different types of work. Others, as Steinbeck and Woody Guthrie and others sang and wrote about, left.
Right.
And that's been one of the beautiful things for me, Gwen, in recent years, is to see more people coming back from California to Oklahoma than the reverse.
Talking to JDwyer, we're talking about Oklahomans. Yes, we'll get into some of the holiday customs of early Oklahomans when we come back. If you'd like to know more about his books, I know Full Circle downstairs here has them, and you can go online as well. John JDwyer, a novelist, award-winning writer, and history professor. You're listening to 1000 KTOK. Here with me in studio is John JDwyer. He is an author, a former history teacher, scholar, well-loved Sunday school professor. How about that? And he's here with me today to talk about Oklahoma history. And I think during this break, John, you were talking about how Shortgrass has just taken off, although it's been out a while, and it won the Will Rogers gold medal, but it's taken off, and I think it's because it's hopeful, and we all want something really hopeful and to show what we're made of and where we came from. So let me ask you this question. It seems to be such a mean time in history. Has it always been mean?
God, I wish I could give an easy answer, Gwen, and say, oh, wow, this is kind of a flash in the pan that, we're just kind of out of control right now. We just need to settle down. But, one of the other things, we were talking about what you come across and learn as you research and study for years, a different time period. And I have to tell you, for all the problems we have today, this is the one time I would most pick to live in Oklahoma. It's the safest time. And you say, well, how could that be with drugs and gangs and opioids? And true, we no doubt we've got plenty of challenges. I would not dispute that at all. But here's the thing. 1920s, 30s, 40s, which is a time period that I researched a lot, both for Volume 2 of the Oklahomans history book as well as Shortgrass. And what I found, Oklahoma was not just a violent place, Gwen, but a dangerous place. I mean, when was the last time that you heard about a gang of outlaws attacking a police station in Oklahoma? When was the last time you heard about judges being targeted for assassination with explosives and all?
That's in our history?
Oh, my goodness. In the 30s, here's the way I would summarize it. Apparently, for all of the good and some of the ethos that we look back toward and like, there was a thin curtain dividing us from the social American fabric from anarchy and just the almost the Lord of the Flies deal. I mean, seriously, when these things, which I'm taking those from the front pages, and these were not isolated events in the 1930s, kidnappings were rampant. Of course, the Charles Urschel oil man kidnapping Oklahoma City is still a famous deal, early 1930s. But if somebody was wealthy, they had the distinct danger of themselves and or their children being kidnapped in Oklahoma towns in the early part of the 20th century. If you were a lawman, you had no more safety from the lawless gang underworld element than the average person in the street. And you think, well, how is that really true? Well, yes, it is true. Apparently, from the journals of the times, it's very true. How could that happen? Once again, a bunch of poor, tough people, just a couple of decades removed from the group that won the West, right? That rode out with their horses and mules into an open, barren land that had hostiles on it and put down stakes. Now, that is not a mamby-pamby group of people.
No, they're used to having their way.
Yeah, and the ones that survive had some toughness to them. And I'm not saying that those are the people that were committing the lawless acts in the 1930s, but I am saying there were plenty of outlaws around in the land run times and stuff too. So just because people learn how to put on coat and ties, it took Oklahoma quite a while to get as what I would consider civilized as we are now. Now, we talk about political discourse and rudeness and all this kind of stuff. Again, all I can say is 2 of our first 3 governors were impeached. Multiple, the first mayor of Oklahoma City died in a gunfight, William Couch, on Main Street, Oklahoma City, 1890, a few months after the run of 89. One of the governors, Jack Walton, Oklahoma City, early 1920s, established machine gun nests at all the entrances to the state capitol to keep the legislature from meeting, because he knew they were getting ready to impeach him, which they went to a hotel and did.
Machine gun nests?
With National Guard troopers behind sandbags. You're thinking, John, are you straying into fiction territory again? No, you don't have to make it up when you're talking Oklahoma history. It probably happened.
That is, I took Oklahoma history. That was not what I studied. I learned the 77 counties and the county seats.
They made us memorize a bunch of flowers and names of tribes and so forth, which was important.
Which are foundational, I suppose. Yes. So, well, we only have a couple of minutes left. Do you have a favorite Oklahoma holiday story?
Well, yes. Since you asked, Edward Everett Dale. Especially those that might have gone to OU. You probably had some classes, as we did in Dale Hall. Edward Everett Dale was Dr. Blackburn over at the History Center calls him the Dean of Oklahoma Historians, and he was also a pioneer. He was a young cowboy back in the old Greer County, southwest Oklahoma, that was Texas until we got it from him. And one of his great books, Frontier Ways, talks about the Christmas holiday season. He said Thanksgiving, not so much for pioneers, unless they came from the north, with kind of the pilgrim deal, and then but it took a while to get around to really Thanksgiving observance. But Christmas, it really, Gwin, highlighted something I do think was better back in the old days than it is now, and that is this unvanquishable sense of community. The Oklahoma pioneer community, when Christmas would near, everything was done by community. They would have a group that would go out and cut down a big cedar or fir tree. Sometimes they'd have to go miles away to get it. They'd bring it back. They'd put it up either if they had a church house built, they'd put it there. If not, they'd put it in the schoolhouse. Had another committee that decorated the tree. Had another committee that came up with, okay, who are the poor children in the area that we need to get gifts for? Of course, the truth is they were all poor. But these were the kids that had nothing. And then Christmas Eve would come, they'd have a big dinner. The school teacher typically would lead the school kids choir in the Christmas hymns, and all the community's presents were up on this big 15, 20-foot cedar or fir tree. So you would have your name up there, that your hubby would get you something, maybe a jewelry box or something that you never would have dreamed you could have had. Maybe you got him a shaving jar or something. But one by one, they'd grab all the presents down from the tree, pass them out, toys and fruit to the kids. They'd distribute them to the really poor children. The community would typically end in some great song of our history and faith, Amazing Grace, or what's the one they always sing at the end of It's a Wonderful Life?
What is the song they sing at the end of It's a Wonderful Life?
Da 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 da.
Yes,
whatever that one is.
Right.
And they would sing it better than that. Then they'd go their ways, typically have Christmas dinner at home the next day, and get back to the
Hark
life.
the Herald
Hark
Angels
the Herald.
Sing.
Thank you.
Thank you for singing. And so it would be a big community thing. Would it last all night?
It would last many hours. It would last as long as it needed to. And one of the big, hardy local fellows would dress up as Santa Claus and bring it in and get it kicked off. But the thing that's amazing, can you imagine in this day and time, a community sitting around and we all sharing, no matter Democrat, Republican, black, white, rich, poor, everybody participated. Everybody was on an equal level, and yet there was some left over and devoted to the people even poorer than we are, to make sure that everybody had part of it. So you talk about community spirit. And so I think that is something that I would like to see us get back to. I love how a lot of us on Facebook and elsewhere, we're putting the politics aside and we're focusing on the friendships, what we have in common. I think this is a great time of year to do that, to be thankful and to remember this shared heritage we have, that we've lived, we've worked, we've won, we've lost, and we've died together, and so have our forefathers in this state.
John JDwyer is an author and just probably one of the finest men I know. Thank you for coming in, and happy holidays to you. You can find his books at Full Circle Bookstore and as well online, and we'll be looking for that second part of the Oklahomans. Thank you so much. I'm Gwin Faulconer-Lippert. You're listening to 1000 KTOK.